Hello everybody, today we're talking about dealing with dyslexia in education. It's an Abilitynet webinar as part of a series that we're running for the National Dyslexia Awareness Week, which is the 3rd to the 9th of November 2014. We've covered a number of other topics, dyslexia in the workforce and dyslexia in digital design. Today we'll be looking specifically at dyslexia in education, mainly talking about adult education, but covering children's level education as well to some extent, and looking at some of the technologies that can help people with dyslexia to enable them to get the most from their education. My name is Mark Walker. I'm the marketing manager at Abilitynet, and I manage our webinars. And I'm joined today by Pauline. Hi, Pauline. Can you tell me a little bit about what your role is at Abilitynet?
Yeah, I'm the trainee occupational psychologist and senior assessor consultant. So I do a number of assessments for individuals going into college or university through the DSA process.
Great. And where are you based? Do you work out of one particular institution, or do you move around?
We do move around. My main base is the Brighton Centre, but we do move around depending on where we're needed.
Okay. And do you only work with education clients, or do you also work with others in terms of your sort of...
I work with others, yeah. I work with a number of people in the workplace, doing a number of different job roles, but it's mainly education in the workplace.
Okay, and mainly adults, as you say, in the sense of your particular expertise.
Yeah.
So what we're going to cover today is, firstly, we're going to look at what the impact of dyslexia is in education. As we say, mainly we're going to be referring to adult education. We have reviewed this and looked at the materials and considered the needs of children and young people. We think largely the materials will be relevant. We could do a separate talk just about children, and particularly in relation to schools and their responsibility to children, but we're not going to be delving into that too much. We're going to be looking at the practical help that we think can help with dyslexia. The sorts of adjustments you can make to your computer, the sorts of specialist hardware or software that you may find helpful. Look at some of the help that's available, particularly just to review the help that's available from Abilitynet. And then a theme probably running through it for us is how is mobile changing things? And we'll refer to mobile as a particular sort of set of technologies and consider their impact on helping students deal with dyslexia. A little bit of background about Abilitynet. We are a national charity, a UK-based charity. We actually work with all sorts of global partners as well, so we have a global reach. We provide a workplace assessment service, so Pauline is one of a team of people that go into the workplace to assess individuals in their workplace to look at how technology could help them be more productive. We also have a student-based service where we assess anybody who's eligible for disabled students' allowances, and we will assess them and make recommendations about the technologies that they can get using their DSA grant. We have accessibility services. We help a number of big corporate customers make sure their websites and apps and digital services are accessible. We're doing a lot of work with Barclays at the moment, and we did some work recently with Barclays looking at how they won the business case internally for accessibility. So we work with them at a strategic level as well. We then, our main purpose really, those are sort of commercial services, and the income from those serves our free services for disabled people. We provide help at home to disabled people with their computer systems. We also have a lot of fact sheets, which we'll refer to today, on our website. And we have a number of other services like My Computer My Way, which is a free interactive tool. And we may get a chance to look at that. We'll certainly refer to it during the session. And finally, we run something with BT called the Tech for Good Awards. And amongst those awards, they recognise people who use technology to make the world a better place. Amongst some of those award winners and finalists in the past few years, there's been one particular piece of software that's been hugely popular around improving the way that dyslexia can be, the spell checking software that helps people with dyslexia, and we'll refer to that as well. So very briefly, we've picked up from Wikipedia the what is dyslexia. The definition from Wikipedia is a developmental reading disorder characterized by difficulty with learning to read fluently and with accurate comprehension. And that's it has nothing to do with intelligence or capability, simply to do with your ability to learn to read fluently. It's the most common learning difficulty, and it is the most recognised reading disorder. Other issues you may come across which are related are dyspraxia and dyscalculia. I'm not quite sure exactly what those are, Pauline. Do you have examples of what dyspraxia and dyscalculia actually, what the impact is on the person?
Dyspraxia relates mainly to spatial awareness and difficulties around that, and the dyscalculia side is more to do with arithmetic and mathematics, difficulties around
Yeah,
those areas that sometimes correlate with dyslexia.
great, thank you. Now, the things that a lot of people won't realise is just how widespread dyslexia is in the UK, and I'm assuming that this is an international sort of proportion as well. That at least 6 million people in the UK are estimated to be affected by dyslexia. Now, that's getting close to 10% of the population. Now, of those 4 million will have it severely enough that they will notice the effects day to day. And of course, there will be a scale, and some people will be affected by it more. As we'll see, it's also dependent on what you're trying to do. So, in some circumstances, that the effects of dyslexia are going to be more noticeable to you and the people around you than in others. Just particularly in terms of education, the DSA, the Disabled Students Allowances, which are available to anybody in higher and further education, any UK registered student in higher or further education, they require you to have a diagnosis of dyslexia. Most people who have dyslexia won't have that diagnosis. They may not even necessarily know that that's the particular issue that they're facing. But if you are going to go in and look for help with funding to support you in education, you will need to have a diagnosis. So let's talk a little bit about the impact. I'll just briefly talk these through, and then I'll talk to Pauline about the people that she sees every day. The most obvious things are obviously around communication, and in terms of working in education, it's collaboration with others, the ability to read and write and connect up, comprehend content, take notes, connect together what you're meant to be learning, and then putting it together and putting it back out to prove that you've learned it. So essays will be an issue, but equally time management can be a problem. It takes longer to do some things. If you're taking longer to read or write or comprehend the content, it can take longer. The most obvious impact in terms of what happens, the symptom of this, is that you don't achieve the results you deserve, that you don't get the grades that that would recognise your capabilities because you're taking too long, or you're not taking your notes in the way that you could, or comprehension isn't being recognised as well as it should. And of course, that will lead to personal and emotional effects. So Pauline, you're seeing people every day. What's the sort of typical story for somebody in education who has dyslexia, and what sort of impact does it have on their life?
Exactly what you said, really. Difficulties with reading and research, having to read material a number of times in order to understand it, which can then obviously cause a bit of confusion, but also cause research to accumulate, which will then have a direct impact on their ability to write and articulate their ideas in an essay or an assignment or a report, because the research that they're creating isn't as clear as they'd expect, so sometimes they can tend to digress or repeat their points regularly throughout their argument, or sometimes they may misinterpret the question or assignment brief altogether, which will then make their essay incorrect. Note taken as well can also have quite a big impact, because if the client can't keep pace with what's being disclosed in a lecture or a seminar, their information and the information that they're attempting to learn is also inaccurate, which will then be something that they would like to use as part of an essay, but because they haven't captured it effectively, they're either having to do a lot of self-directed learning to capture that information, or they just don't have the time to do it, which then obviously has an impact on their time management. A lot of the time individuals are either struggling to meet the submission date set, or they miss them altogether, or they're handing in work that they're not happy with, which again, like you said, can have a massive impact on the results, which doesn't really reflect their academic abilities in terms of their understanding and knowledge. It's just they need their work to be marked for content as opposed to spelling, grammar, the way in which it's structured, and so on.
And I guess that the effect on somebody's confidence and their own sort of sense of their own capability must be enormous as well.
Yeah.
Not least because they're not getting the grades, so they sort of consider themselves to be a less good student than the ones who are getting the good grades, I guess.
Yeah, I think sometimes you can come across a lot of students who lack the motivation because they feel that they can't do it, or the initiation on work is so daunting sometimes that they put it off. Prioritising work can be difficult as well. You do tend to find a lot of people with dyslexia are more hands-on, visual people, whereas sometimes writing essays aren't as visual as you'd hope. So hence some of the software that we would recommend to support with that and meet their more required learning style and approach to creating essays and reading and so on.
Great, thank you. Now, of course, we looked in the last time we spoke. We talked about working with the workplace. I think one thing we've really noticed when we were talking about education is just how challenging some of the environments can be. That you're not sat at your desk with a computer or a desktop computer or a laptop. You have to work in a lot of different environments, and of course that can have a huge impact on anybody's ability to study, whether you have dyslexia or any other whether or not you have dyslexia or any other condition, because you have to get used to working independently. You may be working in the library, you may have to do field work, you may be out on placement, you may be working in a classroom, you may be in a huge lecture theatre like the one I have a picture of here on the screen. You may be in labs. Now, all of those environments require different skills in terms of all of that learning and reading and writing and comprehension, all the other pressures that are put on you. And I guess that equally you must have that when you're talking to people. There may be all sorts of times when they're finding it particularly difficult to study.
Yeah.
Is there anything in particular about education you think that sticks out from your point of view when you're talking to clients?
I mean, I think the main thing you've got to assume when you're meeting somebody is that no individual with dyslexia is the same, and you really have to break down their course details to find out that, and make sure you're recommending support that will be feasible for the environment that they're working in. So, I mean, a lot of the time you do tend to find people with dyslexia working in libraries can have a difficulty with concentrating and can get easily distracted. University libraries can tend to be quite busy, noisy environments, so it's sometimes not as an ideal place to learn and study as you'd probably assume. And also, again, with the large lecture theatres, you can get easily distracted. You can't really ask for clarification, or you're less likely to be able to keep pace with the material being disclosed because the lecturer can sometimes move at quite a fast pace, and there's a lot of other people around you trying to learn the information as well, so you kind of don't feel the confidence to stop and ask for them to repeat a point. And a lot of the time students can say to me that they just tend to switch off, or they'll leave the lecture not really understanding what's been discussed because they don't feel that they've been able to ask questions or ask the lecturer to slow down and repeat points as well.
Thank you. And again, I think we talked about mobile briefly. I said this was a theme really rather than something we're going to have an individual slide about, but this is an obvious case for having to deal with mobile, having to be on the move, sometimes taking notes in a classroom, sometimes taking doing work independently in the library. And I'm assuming, a picture of most students these days is that they have laptops, they have maybe iPads, possibly other tablets. They're using their phone to take notes potentially in a lecture. And this is where the
Yep.
mobile technology, I'm sure, is hugely important, rather than the picture you have of somebody at work working on the desktop that's fixed, in a fixed location. So I've got a number of potential adjustments that we think can help with dyslexia. I would point you at this stage to Dyslexia and Computers web fact sheet on our website. Sorry, there's not a very good picture there, a screen grab, you can't read that, but it actually says Dyslexia and Computers. But abilitynet.org.uk/dyslexia and computers takes you into one of our most popular fact sheets, which is covers all sorts of different options, things like overlays, preferences that you can change within the computer, keyboards and different options for keyboards, spell checking software, speech to text and text to speech as a way of inputting and outputting content in and out of your computer. Using mind mapping, we're going to look at that particularly as a way to organise thoughts. And then using organisers and reminders, things like Outlook, as a way to support someone who needs to just keep a routine rolling. And then equally in education, some of the recommendations we'll make are for non-medical helper support. somebody to help you in the learning environment. Now, we're not going to dwell on those and run through this list now, but just to give you a sense that there's a big list out there, and you can have a look on our website. There's plenty of other places out there you could look for the types of adjustments. What we're going to do is run through with some of them now, particularly the most popular ones, just to give you a sense of how these may help an individual. So we're going to look at reading. These are obviously the sort of tasks that people have got to undertake: reading, writing, note taking, and some of the cognitive barriers that people face because of the dyslexia. So, Pauline, could you tell us a little bit about the sorts of issues that you see people come across in terms of their reading, and then equally some of the solutions that you commonly recommend to them?
Yeah, I mean, one of the main difficulties that we tend to find for people with dyslexia is the accuracy of their reading. So sometimes they may be reading the text but not actually processing or interpreting it correctly. Like I mentioned before, they often have to reread the material a number of times, which can then make it quite confusing. The preferences in which the text is presented can also have an effect on their reading abilities, in so much as if it's quite a heavy text-based piece of material, it can be a bit of visual overload. Their eyes can tend to jump across the page, the words can appear a bit blurred. So some of the kind of tools that we may look at this point are things like overlays to change the background colours, or the preferences on a computer to change the background colours. Font has a massive effect on people's ability to read, so Times New Roman is kind of a font that people with dyslexia should avoid, and use the more straight kind of text-based fonts such as Arial. The reading rulers are good for kind of breaking down the information, so instead of finding that their eyes can jump across the page or they get distracted by pictures or other information on a page, the ruler allows them to digest it in a more accessible pace, so they're processing it more effectively as well. However, I mean, the main kind of support that we would look at are turning text-based information into more of an audio style version. So things such as text-to-speech and screen readers, so you can scan anything text-based onto a computer using this software, and it will actually read it out loud to you at a pace, a speed that makes sense to you. So you can process it and listen to it, and people are less likely to switch off or misinterpret it because they're listening to it and being able to follow it and process it more effectively. The good things with these speech-to-text softwares as well is they tend to turn the text into a more of a PDF file, so you can actually start editing the text and changing it to font sizes that's more accessible for you as well as a reader and a user. It is worth mentioning at this point the coloured overlays, they don't work for everyone. Some people don't appear to have visual stress, and people do. However, it's making sure that you find the right colour that's most effective for you. So as you can see in the picture there's a number of different colours, and as a rule we would tend to do a dyslexia colour sensitive test as part of the assessment anyway, to see which colours would be most effective for them when they're reading.
Right, and the just to revisit the text-to-speech and screen reader software, some of that, of course, is built into some of the computers that people have. I guess this isn't necessarily specialist software, but do you find that the specialist software has particular features that people find helpful? I mean, I know how to get my computer to speak to me. It doesn't do it particularly well. It can be a bit clunky. I've got a Mac.
Yeah.
So we're talking about specialist software here,
yeah.
with particular features, I guess, that work.
It has inbuilt masking support on there as well. They have inbuilt screen rulers. Like I said, they have that scanning function where they can turn anything paper-based or text-based into an audio-style book. And a lot of the time when we go into the writing side of things, these text-to-speech always have quite advanced spell checkers on there and homophone checkers for the individual as well. So they don't tend to just be a reading tool. It can go above and beyond that into more of a spelling, grammar, compositional task kind of tool for them as well. But like you said, sometimes having a bit more of a robotic sound doesn't really support the individual, so it needs to be a bit more of a human style speech, and that's kind of what these specialist software can tend to offer to some extent, a bit more of a human style talking out loud to you as opposed to something sounding quite robotic.
Great, thank you. So on to writing, and I mean, imagine that this is essentially very directly related to the reading. Can you tell us a bit about how you help people with this?
Yeah, I mean, A common difficulty is obviously spelling and grammar, not understanding grammatical rules or not really being able to think about where grammar needs to go because they're very focused on just getting their points down. Sometimes grammar's overused, underused. Spelling again can be such things as the homophones, all the theirs and the wheres within the English language, not recognising which one is correct to use within a certain instance. And spelling as well, you do come across a lot of individuals who tend to limit the vocab that they use because of spelling and definition understanding, and they tend to find that they're using the same word throughout their essay, which obviously can affect the fluidity of the argument that they're trying to present. And also there's the difficulty with clear articulation and accurate articulation of their ideas, so they can tend to find there's a delay between thoughts and writing. They have what they want to say in their head, but trying to articulate that in an essay can be difficult, and they can tend to find that they will digress or repeat points, and the structure of their work can be very bitty, and they can tend to jump from one point to another and back again as well. And the miskeying, again, that can be a common difficulty with typing as well, that they might miskey or spell words incorrectly, and sometimes inbuilt spell functions of Word won't necessarily pick up miskeying if the word itself is an actual word in the English language, but it's the incorrect one that they actually wanted to use at this point. So some of the solutions that we may recommend are advanced spell checkers that will go above and beyond that and will highlight information and definitions and kind of create a spelling bank for the individual. The speech to text, so that is more of a dictation kind of piece of software where they can actually articulate their thoughts verbally. So they'll speak into a headset and the computer will type it up. So a lot of individuals find that they can articulate their views through speech very well, and it's a kind of a way of just getting all their thoughts down onto paper, and then they can use the mind mapping to help structure that work more effectively as well. So the mind mapping is a very powerful tool in so much as, first of all, it allows for that visual imagery kind of approach to creating an essay. So an individual will put their essay title in the middle and then break that essay title down with different branches around it. The individual then write in the individual branches themselves, which kind of breaks down the text further. So instead of having 8 pages of continuous text, they're only presented with what's in an individual branch of that mind map as well. So it makes learning and understanding a lot more easier. And then when they've kind of finished each of the branches, they can then structure their work by moving the branches around and exporting that mind map into a Word document that will actually create a complete report or essay style format for them. And the keyboard adaptations as well. I mean, the speech to text kind of hinders any of those spelling difficulties anyway, and keyboard difficulties because you're not actually having to use the keyboard to get your thoughts down. But I mean, there are different recommendations that you can put in place, such as coloured stickers or different kind of keyboards to help with making the information appear clearer. So like we said before, sometimes keyboards that are black and white can be less visual for the user, so they may often make mistakes when typing as well.
Great, thank you. We're going to have a quick look at mind mapping, I think, because we're aware that people often don't know what this is all about. You mentioned it in terms of its overall usage, but this particular, I'll pull up a screen of something called Webspiration, which I think is a free tool that's available. There are a number of different products. Is there one in particular that you think that people find best, or is this really a case of people giving it a try to see which one works for them?
I think it's exactly that. It's trying to find out which one works for them. I would, as a rule of thumb, tend to show a number of different approaches to mind mapping to decide on which one they would find most effective, instead of assuming the one that I prefer overall. It is down to each individual case, but I mean, they do tend to all work in similar ways. So you could have pictures in there. A lot of people with dyslexia like to work with colour, so this allows to break down the information further. And I think sometimes, just as you can see there, with the lots of branches coming off, you can actually understand how information can link a lot better through a picture which is easier to absorb than just continuous text. So people can see exactly how one branch might link to another, and they can move them around, so they flow quite nicely in a clear structure.
So this is useful when sort of setting your own thoughts out, but equally, we've mentioned it already, and we're going to mention it in a moment about note taking as a way of collecting information and giving it some structure and organising your thoughts. I'm assuming equally that there's a little bit of a learning curve here in terms of getting to grips with this sort of software.
It's the same with all kind of software. You do need training on it, and as a rule of thumb, again, we would recommend that each individual would have training on all the software that we recommend, so they can understand the functionality of it and how actually it can work in practice with the work that they're doing as part of their course. But yeah, I mean, mind mapping is also very useful for exams as well, for revision. So creating your thoughts and revision into some sort of mind map is a lot easier to recall and work through than trying to learn loads of different information when you're in an exam environment.
Great. And then that leads neatly onto the note taking, the fact that you've got the reading and the writing, but equally there's a sort of collecting together the information that you're being given. So can you tell us briefly about the sorts of things that people face, the struggles they face here?
Yeah, I mean, the main difficulties are trying to keep pace with what the lecturer is disclosing to them, listening and making notes at the same time. They can find it quite difficult to be able to switch and divide their attention between that, and often they can only do one or the other, so they may either be focusing on note taking but not really understanding the lecture, or they will be listening but not making any notes, so actually recalling the information at a later date is difficult. Distraction and concentration again can be something that's quite difficult when note taking. So what we would tend to recommend are digital voice recorders that can often be linked to other pieces of software, so the PowerPoints themselves, and will index down the audio into different sections or topics or themes. So when they're listening back to the information, not only are they taking everything that's been disclosed, but they're creating it in a lot more of a manageable format, so they can link whatever the lecturer is discussing with one PowerPoint slide directly to the audio about that slide. So instead of listening to 2 hours of audio, it's broken down into, say, for example, 10-minute chunks. So it's a lot more accessible for them to kind of grab when they need it for either essays, research, revision, and so on as well. But it also gives them the ability to, when they're in the lecture, either write some notes at the same time or key some notes into their laptop at the same time, or just sit back and listen, really take it in and absorb it, and recognise that actually everything that they're learning at that particular time has got a permanent memory store in this digital dictaphone or digital device that we're giving them to record the lectures.
And I put a picture up there of phones that people will be carrying around with them, and again a mention of mobile. But when we were talking about this, we were saying that some of the things you've mentioned there, the functionality, being able to index the content, it's okay to be able to put your phone down on the lecture desk and just sort of listen, have it listening and recording everything that's being said. But it's much more about organising that stuff afterwards. That's a real challenge, I guess. And just having a very long recording of a lecture that you sat through isn't necessarily going to be of a lot of use. And
people just wouldn't use it, no.
Yeah. And I think that links to the need for training as well, where people may need to just be shown some of the techniques and strategies which are not about the tool. You could be given this tool that can record, but actually the problem is you're not going to be able to organise your information. That's the actual thing you're going to be learning to do better with using this tool.
Yeah, and a lot of individuals find it difficult to pick out the key points as well. So as opposed to just picking out key information, they'll be writing every single piece of information that's disclosed to them, which obviously a lot of it isn't really relevant. Some of it is, some of it isn't. So they'll give them techniques on picking out key information.
Right. And then we've got an example here of an audio note taker, which I think really shows the next level on. Just recording what's going on is one thing, but this is a piece of software which may be recommended in part of one of our assessments, and it's got the slides down the left-hand side of the screen, which you may be able to pick up in advance in terms of how higher education, further education works now that the lecturer may have presented that information already and put it online somewhere. And then you can work through, there's some reference material text, and you can put your audio in to connect to the particular slides as they're spoken. So this is a quite complicated picture, but actually a very simple thing when you're using it is just you click through for each slide and add in the relevant content, make a few notes for yourself, and as you say, you're then getting that in terms you need to learn how to do that. There'll be a little bit of training to get used to doing it in a lecture, but that's possible to do that whilst the person is talking and collecting that information together for later. So that tool, that's called Audio Notetaker, I think, isn't it? Is that the actual name of the tool? Yeah. And there are others similar that do all sorts of other sort of, they each have their sort of features that may be relevant. So finally,
and each approach again would be individual depending on their course itself. So,
as you say, it may be directly relevant to the environment in which they're doing their learning as well. There may be some places where that's not going to be practical. Yeah. So finally, the cognitive barriers. Could you tell us a little bit about these?
Yeah, so I mean, these are kind of related to concentration. So the way in which you take in information and you're focused on the information will affect how well you process it and encode it. Obviously, if you don't take it in effectively, your memory recall of it will be inaccurate or not correct, or actually missing quite large chunks of information. And then this can obviously have a massive impact on planning and organising your workload. So I mean, a lot of the time we would make solutions such as training on how to use the Outlook calendar training tool and reminder systems. So you've got these systems that flash up in front of you, again, mobile devices. So when you're out and about, you've got a reminder that will vibrate in your pocket or in front of you, so it flashes up on your screen to remind you to do things. Strategy coaching on memory tools, so different approaches on how to take in information in more manageable chunks, so you're more likely to process it and encode it effectively, so recalling it at a later date would be easier. So things like mind mapping are easier to remind yourself of, so it's a visual picture, less information is presented and you're taking it in more effectively than just writing loads of information in bullet points. So I mean, the cognitive barriers are something we come across quite a lot with dyslexia, and they're the kind of things that we would look at also, maybe through some of the non-medical helper support as well.
And we were mentioning when we were looking at this in the workplace, this is obviously an area where there might be a need for training and support that you would get from your employer, and equally you would be looking for that non-medical support, but potentially training and support for the individual in terms of their strategy for dealing with this, which is clearly going to carry them through life afterwards anyway. Just, you know, some of these tech tools and techniques, building them into their work, their daily life, and then using that as they move into the workplace becomes more, you know, it's easier for them to do that if they're learning this during education. Seems like an obvious benefit.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. Well, as you can see, there's a huge range of software and tools and techniques that may help with dyslexia for anybody who's in education. If you're in higher education, further education, you're eligible for a disabled students allowance, and that could cover the cost of some of these specialist tools. It could cover the cost of the training and support that you may need to enable you to deal with the whatever your particular course is and however it works. You make an application to the funding body. They assess whether you're eligible. You will need a diagnosis of dyslexia, and then you would be eligible for some support, and we would then provide an assessment, personalised assessment, amongst lots of other providers. There's a whole huge range of people who can do this around the country. We do them around particular locations, and that recommendation is then turns into a recommendation for particular hardware or software or other adaptations. Similar sort of picture in schools in the sense that you can get an assessment, but the funding is not so straightforward, and maybe is not directly related to an overall allowance that any student can have, which you can have in higher further education. It may depend within your local authority or your school the sort of support that you can get. It may be that there's specialist support already available. It may be that other students would be eligible, and so they lump that together. So within the schools, it's much more about contacting the school. If you're concerned about a child or that is an area that you're trying to work in, then the school may want to look at this as a sort of a broader issue around special education needs, or it may be a particular issue related to dyslexia that they want to tackle. We offer help to any disabled person anywhere in the UK trying to use the technology to overcome that particular impairment that they face or the particular condition that they're trying to deal with. You can phone us anytime. Well, I say anytime. You can phone us 9 till 5 every day, 0800 269 545. And Alex, who answers that helpline, covers a whole range of different solutions and support, but can pass you on to the relevant sort of specialist knowledge if that's what you're looking for. Very often that will be our fact sheets. I recommend you go and have a look at our fact sheets. There's a couple relating to dyslexia, but there's also stuff about voice recognition, so using that software that Pauline has mentioned and how to build that into your sort of workflow. And then we have a service for disabled people. Any disabled person who's not in work can have access to the IT support service at home. We have a network of volunteers around the country. They're not specialists in the sense of dealing with people with disabilities or assistive technology. They're generalists in the sense they can get your computer up and running, they can look at your preferences, they can have a look at some of this advice around dyslexia and enable you to adapt your computer to suit your needs. And they're available to come into your home, or they can do things on the telephone or do things remotely with you. And then finally, we have a really great tool called My Computer My Way. This maps all of the accessibility features on every mainstream laptop, desktop, tablet and phone. And you can go in and say, I'm having trouble seeing the screen, and it will give you a number of different options that you then go through and to get some very specific screen-by-screen advice about you need to click this button, you need to turn this on, turn that off. So I recommend having a look at that. So in summary, thank you, Pauline, for your input there. I hope people listening in have got a sense now of the range of different things that can help somebody with dyslexia. This is not a one-size-fits-all. I think it's very common for people to think, oh yeah, you need to make the background coloured, or the text needs to be a bit different or something. There's a huge range of needs that may arise because of dyslexia, and similarly a range of different options that may suit somebody. And it really is about looking at the individual, the circumstances, and in education in particular, the environments that they're trying to learn in and the tasks that they're being set. There may not be a cost to this. There's lots of options that you've mentioned that really either are low cost or no cost, simply by adjusting the hardware and software that the person has. And then finally, I guess a lesson that we're always learning and sharing in Abilitynet is that the technology is not the answer. It's about the person. It's about the training and support they receive. It's about their ability to do what they want to do, and then getting the right tools for the job and learning how to use those tools. So don't overlook that as a sort of a significant stage in the process of actually implementing some of these solutions and adapting and changing your habits and learning new routines to make the best use of the technology that's available. So thank you very much, Pauline. As I said, this is one of a number of webinars that we have about dyslexia. And if you want to contact us, Robin Christopherson is our head of digital inclusion. He is available for any questions and queries you have around dyslexia, or you can give us a call on 01926 465 247, or call our 800 number, as I mentioned in the session. The next Abilitynet webinar is Dyslexia and Digital Design. That will also be recorded, and like this webinar, will be available on our website at abilitynet.org.uk/webinars. So thank you, Pauline. Thank you for joining me today. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thank you.
Bye.